when you have to write something that's really short, it's really hard. 250 words, it has to be a really sharp essay.
What I love about these essay prompts is there's so much variety. It's making for a really fun read. And
applicants don't need to be one thing.
You have to prove it. If you say you're curious about something, well, show me that you've been curious about something.
Right.
Word on the street is that the admissions committee at HBS has really enjoyed reading these essays.
Harvard Business School turned heads in spring 2024 when they introduced 3 all-new essays. At the time, reactions ranged from dismissive to downright dismayed. It was hard to find anyone excited about the new essay prompts. But that was a year ago, so in today's episode of the mbaMission podcast, we're going to pick up the conversation and discuss what we learned, how we feel about the essays, and strategies for crafting responses to them. We know what we've seen at mbaMission, but we wanted to get additional perspective, so we invited Liza Weale, founder of Gatehouse Admissions and a past colleague of ours at mbaMission, to join us. So I'm here today with Jeremy and Liza. You two wrote a book specifically focused on Harvard and Stanford essays. And this book, by the way, you can get on our line. It's free now. One of the reasons it's free is because Harvard changed its essays and changed them in a dramatic way.
We'll be updating the book.
Right.
But it did change their essays significantly.
Right.
So,
and we're a year into the new essays. And Liza, just give me your general impressions. What did you think last year with the essay, when the essay happened? What do you think now about the essays? Now we've gone through it at this point, a couple of rounds of essays.
When I read the questions at first, there was just so many parts of the new questions. I felt very constricted, or I felt like they were too narrowly focused. I thought they were too suggestive of what they were looking for. And as consultants, as advisors in helping people tell their story, I've come full circle. I actually loved working on them. I thought they were hard. I thought they provided challenge, which is good for all of us. But I came around really, really liking the questions.
So maybe we should talk about what they had before. So before they had this, big sprawling prompt. At one point, it had no words. They brought it down to 900 words. Right. And it was just basically a blank slate, which I think was great for applicants and became untenable for the admissions committee during a ChatGPT era, where I think they just felt like they had to get way, way, way more particular to move away from the general towards the specific, where you can't fudge. It's very hard to fudge the specific. So I think this was all a reaction to that. 3 short essays, 300 and 250 words, and with lots of moving parts, right?
Yeah.
And they're short. Let's pause here to say they're short, and it's the old... When you have to write something that's really short, it's really hard. It is really hard to get down to those 200 to 250 words or 300 words, whatever it is.
And it takes so long to get to something really good at that length. It's kind of, when you think about how many times you iterate on a 300-word essay and how much it grows and evolves over time, it's kind of amazing. Right. But just because it's shorter, I'd actually argue it makes the challenge that much harder.
What's the old wedding cliche? It's like, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Exactly.
And that's it's very, very hard to write something where you're actually getting all of the pieces. Like, there's so many specific requests in these prompts. Like, you have to include like 3, 4, 5 things to nail this in 300 words. Yeah. I mean, maybe should we read the prompt?
Yeah, let's take a pause here. And let's read the actual questions. Liza, would you do us the honors?
Sure. The Business-Minded essay. Please reflect on how your experiences have influenced your career choices and aspirations, and the impact you will have on the businesses, organizations, and communities you plan to serve. All of that in up to 300 words.
So break it into parts. Like, you have to reflect on your past experiences, how they've influenced your career choices to date. Yeah. Also, how your experiences, and it's a little bit ambiguous in the language, but also how your experiences have influenced your aspirations, and then also talk about the impact you plan to have on businesses, organizations, and communities you plan to serve in 300 words. I mean, there are 4 or 5 specific requests with maybe a couple sub-requests, businesses, organizations, and communities. Maybe it's a good question to ask you. Like, do you feel like every single applicant is nailing every single aspect of these, or are you like, you're getting,
that's my thinking is how could they?
Yeah, so maybe you're getting like 4 of 5.
Right,
or maybe you're talking about like, I'm talking about the impact on an organization or community, but not on my business or something like that. And I think that's leaving some applicants with a little bit of anxiety. Like, I know I'm pretty close to answering all this.
Right.
But have I nailed everything? And so I don't think it's a requirement that, you want to get pretty close. I mean, if you can nail all of them, of course, that's awesome.
Right.
And I think that is actually, I think that's why HBS does almost include all those prompts, because they're letting the applicant make the strategic choice, the judgment that works for them, which of course is very unsettling and slightly terrifying if you're not going to answer all those prompts. But I've seen drafts of essays that try to address all those prompts, and there's no depth.
No, it's hard to pull off.
Right.
Yeah, it's really hard to pull off. So, Liza, how do you even start with a question like this?
Well, I think a lot of it, and I'll share also what I've seen. When we first started working on this essay, we focused a lot on, thinking about sort of how someone got to where they are in their career and where they're thinking about going forward. And what we found is a lot of it was, I went to college and I took a finance class, and then I fell in love with investing. So then I went to investment banking, where I learned a lot about deals. And there I saw an industry I was interested in. So I went into private equity, and and then, and no real pivotal moments that really
influence character, values, stuff like that. Yeah.
So I think what we learned over, and this was really in round 1, where we meet every other week, and we were all reading each other's clients' essays to try to understand really what works. And what we found is, like, what's essential, what our advice is always to really start with, okay, where are you headed? What are you inspired to go do? And then start connecting the dots between that and where you've been. Because probably if you're focused on what's inspiring you, those are where the best stories are going to be.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I just want to pause here to recognize a few things. When you're working with 3 essays, and you mentioned sort of and then, the admissions committee is seeing 3 essays. They're also seeing your resume. They're also seeing recommenders. So the reality is the 3 essays have to fit together. They also have to fit together with the resume. They also have to fit together with other real estate, including the recommendation. So I think on the one hand, yes, it's 3 individual essays, but also it's more like a jigsaw puzzle. How do you take these 3 essays? How do you put them together and tell one story about yourself?
And I mean, in that respect, I think you need to keep the reader learning. Like, they need to be on substantively different topics or different values. Like, yes, you could talk about 2 business experiences in your business or a leadership essay theoretically, but they have to be showing 2 totally different dimensions of yourself. Right. Someone's learning something very new about you. I think ideally you're situating them in different environments if you can,
right?
And still showing new values, right? Or still revealing your character. Yeah, but. I mean, I think the key that applicants need to start with is, like, how do I keep how do I get to the point where the reader is at the 3rd essay going, wow, like, I learned a lot about this guy in the first one, or this woman in the first one. I learned a lot about her in the second one. Right. Like, I'm in the 3rd essay and I'm still saying there's something really interesting going on here. I think that a lot of other firms say, like, oh, well, you have to brand yourself. We've talked about this before.
We have talked about this.
You're a brand. Like, you're not a brand. Human beings aren't brands. Well, you're not detergent. Yeah. You're not Diet Coke. right. You're not a simple product. You can be several. You can have different dimensions of yourself. You can be a leader at work, and you can be a synergist on the board you're at, and you can be a creative thinker.
And a good grandson or granddaughter. Yeah. That's all a piece of who you are.
Do you want to learn more about your target business schools? Check out On Track by mbaMission, where we have in-depth modules on all the top business schools, covering everything from what makes them unique to how to tackle the application essays and short answers, and so much more. You can also practice for interview and video questions, all done on your schedule, on demand. We appreciate your dedication to our podcast, and we want to offer you 30% off any On Track subscription. Use the code MBAMPOD to get 30% off any On Track subscription. Check it out at ontrack.mbamission.com.
Jeremy, let's pause here for a minute, and would you please read the second essay?
Okay.
We'll help people start thinking about how they all go together.
Okay, the second prompt, leadership-focused essay. What experiences have shaped who you are, how you invest in others, and what kind of leader you want to become? And this one has fewer words than the last. There's a little gift at the end there.
Right.
I wonder how they said to themselves, this one we only need 250. With the other one we needed 300. This one,
I agree with
250 words.
I agree. And believe me, you're fighting for those 50 words, or you're fighting to go from 300 to 250. In my mind, I think about this and I look at this and I say to myself, what kind of leader do you want to become is a very nuanced piece of this question. First have to recognize there are many different types of leaders. Then you have to align it to who you are as a person, and then you have to be able to articulate that. So I actually found this to be a very difficult prompt of the three.
Right. How you invest in others, what influences how you invest in others. That's a very complicated question, right?
Right.
And, it's something that I think, as we've said before, you can't just sit down and start typing that one like, I'll get to 250 on this one.
Right.
You've got to really think about how you're answering each piece of this puzzle.
And I also think the wording, how you invest in others, it leads folks, lots of applicants and lots of young professionals thinking about mentorship. Because if you think about a lot of the young professionals we work with, they haven't managed people.
Right.
They haven't necessarily been an official leader. Yeah. So they look towards when they've mentored somebody. And that was definitely probably I would argue, the most frequent example that came up in this essay, at least as a starting point. Yeah. And so I think a lot of our role and guidance and how we were a sounding board with this question specifically was to help them see the way they invest in others outside of mentorship. Exactly. Mentorship is explicit investment, right? But there are, whether it's listening to your team and,
great point.
Or even just sharing your ideas and so that you can move the group forward. There's lots of other ways to invest in each other, in one another beyond mentorship.
Yeah. I mean, like even theoretically, like investing your time in an organization
that's true.
And trying to grow it and trying to influence it can be investing in others. It doesn't have to be like explicit one-to-one. You're right, mentorship. Yeah, I think people perceive this as being limiting. And I think that there is the implication in the question. They're anticipating you have invested in others. Like people who are leaders are investing in others. They're not asking how have you invested in yourself.
Right.
They're asking how you have enabled others to grow. But there are lots of ways to enable others to grow, all in 250 words.
Right. And listen, that also gets to this notion here that is probably relevant for other applications, that leadership comes in many forms. Sometimes it's down the food chain. Sometimes it's horizontal. But then also sometimes it's up the food chain, in the sense of if you have not had direct reports yourself, have you nudged maybe a boss in the right direction? Have you actually gone from being sort of someone who reports to a boss to actually be something of a thought partner with that boss? And again, that's just another example of how you should think about this question in terms of how you invest in others. It's hard to have a conversation with your boss and you say to them, you know what, here's how I think we can do things differently. And actually, I had a client who was very successful with that story. And this idea here of maybe that is something that you have to do day to day that you don't even realize.
I mean, what about what kind of leader do you want to become? Is that do you think of that as a role, or do you think more like spiritually, like how you want to develop as a human being, or both?
Yeah, and do you think about are there weaknesses you currently have that you want to shore up, or is it actually your secret power that you want to amplify?
Right.
And that's a tricky balance. And I personally, when I'm coaching folks on this essay, I am less interested in the future, the unknown. I want to hear more about what people have done. Right. So I think it's hard to have here's who I want to be more than just a little bit of this essay, because otherwise it's too much supposition going on.
Right,
like,
that's right.
Here's who I want to be, all this. No, let's focus on who you've been and then draw some inferences, draw some sort of conclusion about where that leads to who you are going to be in the future.
There's so much cause and effect in these questions.
That's right.
Yes.
Like there are all these individual linkages. What experiences have shaped who you are? How you invest in those. So these are experiences that are influencing you today, and then that also is giving you, a linkage to the future, right? So what kind of person, what kind of leader do you want to be in the future? It's all got to be linked. There's got to be a cause and effect. It can't just be utter conjecture. I'd like to be the leader of a great organization. It's like, well, that's not who doesn't? That's not.
Yes.
That's not what they're asking. They're asking more specifically.
That's right.
How your experiences have allowed you to be a certain kind of person and what you'd like to develop.
Right. Exactly. And listen, it works all sorts of different ways. It is very popular to say you want to be an empathetic leader. That may be true, but first you have to prove to me that you're an empathetic person. That's really what it comes from. And at the same point, there is no flavor of the month when it comes to leadership. What I mean by that is, yes, empathetic leader is great, but I had a client of mine, a very successful client of mine, who said, listen, I'm the boss for a reason. And I'm the boss because I'm able to motivate people. I'm able to really achieve the aims we as an organization we want. So I'm not exactly an empathetic leader. In fact, he wasn't an empathetic leader. The bottom line is he made a very compelling case that he was more of the traditional command, I hate to put these terms, command and control leader, which is the idea. He was a visionary, and he was also going to make sure that everything was aligned, people knew what they were doing. And that was very, very compelling. But first, he proved it. First, this is what he does.
And like that person doesn't need to say, I'm going to change my style going forward.
Right.
That person can say, I'm the kind of leader I want to become is one who communicates these expectations even more clearly. Command and control isn't for everyone. Right. I want to work on my communication skills theoretically. That person can say lots of different things. I mean, that person could. There are many different avenues, but I guess my core point is, I think to your point, applicants don't need to be one thing, and they shouldn't be striving like, okay, well, it's politically correct to say like, I'm going to create a warm environment where everyone's included. Well, there's nothing wrong with saying that. That's who you are, and that's where you want to develop, and that's something you have to work on. But you shouldn't feel like you have to be doing that. That there's no prescribed answer for what to the organization you're going to develop or the type of person you're going to be.
So how do you think about even just a strategy for the essay going forward?
So I think one thing we encourage people to do is think about those like the most challenging moments that involved other people or just involved in their career and their community where they felt like they had to rise to the top. Usually there's some good leadership in there.
Yes.
Start there instead of they found the perfect definition of leadership over here where they didn't learn anything. That's not going to be an interesting story. Let's figure out where you yourself really had to rise to the occasion. That's number one. The other thing I think about is let's get some balance. We talked about this before, right? We talked about how this is a puzzle and we have to think about the different pieces. And I generally, if this entire essay is purely around college, that can, if it's the vast majority of it, that could work. But I wouldn't want to shortchange who you are today.
Mature you.
Yeah, because we don't want to, I have been working with you guys. I've known you for years. So a lot of the things that come out of my mouth might sound familiar because I've heard them from you. But we don't want the admissions committee to think your best days were in college. We're all behind you. And, so that's another thing, to balance it out and show, if possible, some sort of arc of your development as a leader would be to my thoughts. Yeah.
Who wants to do the honors on the third essay question?
Okay, who's the most curious about it? Growth-oriented essay. Curiosity can be seen in many ways. Please share an example of how you have demonstrated curiosity and how that has influenced your growth. Up to 250 words.
Up to 250 words.
Not one word above. There is a word counter.
That's right.
I'd like to meet the person who's like, I've answered this in 125 words. It said up to 250 words. We'll just leave it at that. I love this one because I think that curiosity can be seen in many ways, but demonstrating curiosity is kind of about revealing passion. It's about there's a real. Like, this is so wide open, and the answers are so vast and different, and you really get to know someone's personality through kind of how they've just nerded out on something or developed their interest in something. And so I think that it's like, I always talk about inordinate. Like it can't be something you're like, yeah, I like movies. Like that's not curious. Like I always use the word inordinate because I think you've got to have an unusual amount of curiosity in something. It can't be something you're like got a passing interest in, and you have to exhibit that.
That's right. You have to prove it.
It has to be prove it.
You have to prove it. If you say you're curious about something, well, show me that you've been curious about something. Right. That's an important piece of this essay. And the reality is that, again, 250 words, it has to be a really sharp essay.
And like if you're writing that essay on how you were learning a new language, okay, and and you're talking about like how you took lessons, whatever, like that's not going to do it. But if you're talking about how you learned a new language in order to read a specific book in that language, and that's like that was your challenge and level of proficiency. If I do say so myself, I did that. I tried to do that in French. I was like, if I can just read L'Étranger by Albert Camus, I can say I'm a French speaker, right? I'm not saying to them, I learned French. That's not the point. The point is I'm like had some tenacity and something interesting about me and was goal-oriented and was, maybe intellectual or there's something about me that would push me to like that level, right? And so, just listening to Duolingo in your car or whatever it is, that's not enough to exhibit curiosity, right?
Where's it going?
So it's about, I guess what I'm saying is it's like about something broader generally than just curiosity. You're sending a message about your character through this.
I think that's right. Very quickly, though, Jeremy, parlez-vous français?
My French has actually diminished since I read that book. But
it's moi je parle français, y a pas de problème.
Yeah, Liza's fluent.
Oh my God! It's like I don't speak a word of any other foreign language.
You obviously haven't been listening to mine and Liza's French podcast.
Exactly right.
Exactly. I was a French podcast. I was going to try and deliver it in French, like how to get an MBA, and I was going to try and say it in French, but I'm too reticent with the way my accent is these days.
Right.
I was going to say something about this essay because I agree with you that this one is also a really fun one to work with on client or work on with clients because sometimes they're like, okay, here are the three things, and they kind of fall into those buckets that you were just saying. Where one thing I hear a lot is, I'm curious about everything.
Right.
Show me the money. Let's look for the proof there. Or they don't see these moments where they really, stood up and tried and reached for something.
That's right.
And I love what you were saying about having a deep passion and exploring it. But sometimes the answers actually aren't. The best answers are actually, say, more of a fleeting moment, but what someone learned through that experience.
Right, that's right.
So, that's what I love. I'm coming a little bit back to where we started, but what I love about these essay prompts is there's so much variety.
That's right.
And again, it comes to taking a stand, but I've seen effective versions of this essay where somebody went out on a limb, maybe failed at something. And what did they learn through that experience? They didn't become the expert. They weren't doing it all the time.
Right.
But what did they learn about that, and where did that shape who they are how did that shape who they are in the workplace today? So just another angle that we're often thinking about with our clients.
It's very important to remember, though, that curiosity can be seen in many ways, and it need not lead to your profession. At the end of the day, many people think about they have to write this really perfect story about when I was in fourth grade, I basically, picked up some trash. Sustainability was very important to me. I put solar panels on my house, and then that's why I want to build a life in sustainability. You know what? That's a wonderful essay, but it doesn't always have to do that because most people's lives don't work that way. And the reality is you may be curious about something, and it just may manifest in other ways other than professional, and you don't be afraid to share that.
And it doesn't always have to be like totally altruistic. Like I had a candidate a couple years ago who just very intentionally walked every single block of the city of Manhattan.
Yeah,
I think that's cool. It's fun.
Yeah.
Like, he really, really explored. It took him a very, very long time.
Yeah.
An applicant many years ago who was inspired by the LA Times food critic Jonathan Gold, who has since passed, and went out because this guy would just go like super deep into like a narrow type of food, and went out and tried like dozens and dozens and dozens of cappuccinos across our entire city.
I feel like I remember this. But yes.
And it was just like it wasn't about coffee per se. It was just about just kind of getting out there and doing things, exploring other neighborhoods and meeting other people. And it was a really fun metaphor for who this person is. So you might say to yourself like, well, I don't know, have you drank a lot of coffee? It's like that's not the point.
Yeah, exactly.
The point is coffee's been a vehicle for me to learn a lot about my my environment in a world where everyone is staring at their screens. I'm out there looking around, and I'm in every corner of my city meeting and talking to people.
No, I think that's right. I have a great essay about online gambling. Throw in the fact that what percentage of people stick with it more than 6 months, meaning that they've had enough gains that they want to keep on going. It is an incredibly small number. I've heard like 1%, 3%, whatever. It's an incredibly small number.
And of those who keep going, it could be very unfortunate.
Yeah, it could be very unfortunate. So I had a client who basically said, I was a terrible online gambler, and I became curious about what does it actually take to win at online gambling. And he went down the online gambling route that basically brought him to things like data analysis. That this notion here is actually, data analysis is sort of interesting, and he really enjoyed it. And data analysis also happens to be a great profession, it is a great thing to be studied at business school. So for him, there was this great circularity almost to his application.
Right. That is a good one. I was a little anxious, but as we talked before, some applicants take risks and they work. But that one doesn't sound that risky because you got to a place where it manifests, and he was able to talk about it in a really sincere way.
So we've spent some time talking about 3 essays, but we also don't want to imply there are 3 separate essays working alone. Let's take a minute just to think about, okay, how do all these essays fit together?
I disagree they fit together.
You disagree that they fit together? Hold on.
Well, okay.
This may be an important point to discuss.
We said we're allowed to do, good podcasts, good friends. We can all disagree.
Right.
I don't think they need to fit together, and that they need to be totally harmonious. As I said at the beginning, I think you have to keep the reader learning about you, right? Yeah. And so I don't think that they need to be thematically bound to each other. They can be 3 totally discrete glimpses into who an applicant is.
Listen, I'm going to sort of flip that around and say, who is an applicant? There are many different pieces to an applicant, a very human process here. And if we don't show a connection, though, between these 3 pieces of who you are, then suddenly I don't feel like you're coming into focus as a person.
Well, I think that sort of happens because there's other glue. There's other glue through your resume. There's other glue through your short answers. Right. And so it's not like you're saying, hey, here are 3 wild things that you could never have imagined about me. I mean, your business-oriented essay is going to relate in some way to your professional experience. Your leadership essay, maybe you're expanding on something else that some community endeavor or some different aspect of yourself within your professional world. It could be anything. It could be your personal life. You could be leading your family in a unique way, or whatever it might be.
That's right.
Your curiosity could be illuminating of something totally different about you. I don't think they all need to be very linear and connected.
Right. I will say one thing. Let me summarize what you just said. So really, all of these pieces have to fit together.
They can't be in contradiction, probably.
Right. Maybe that's a better way. Thank God we have Liza here.
I think what I'm saying, I guess you're right. That's interesting. Is that your entire application is going to make sense because it's all about you and you're living your life. It doesn't need to be intentionally disjointed.
Right.
It should naturally make sense that you're capable of all these things.
Yep.
I will say, 2 things. Number one, it's important that we state this. It's the end of February, and people are probably watching this in May, June. We're going out on a little bit of a limb right now because we don't know actually at this point, is HBS going to change the questions? I do want to do a quick poll on what your bets are on the topic of online gambling. Do we think they're going to change or not? We'll do that. But that's one thing. But one thing that gives me why I would bet that they're going to stay pretty similar is that word on the street is that the admissions committee at HBS has really enjoyed reading these essays. For, I think, a lot of that reason that you were just talking about, Jeremy, is that because we are discovering a person in these little glimpses, these little just snapshots of who they are. It's making for a really fun read and probably more engaging, certainly different than the cadence that they were getting used to with that longer essay that we were working on.
Do you want to end this on a wager?
I do.
Gambling?
Right.
Okay, so who thinks they're going to keep the essays the same?
Yeah. I definitely think they're going to keep them the same.
Or maybe slight tweaks to words.
I think they're going to tweak the leadership one.
Right.
I think they might tweak the leadership one, but spiritually the same.
Okay.
Right. As you're listening to the podcast, you will see who is right.
It better be me. And if they do change it, I voted for that way too.
No one ever looks back on pundits anyway.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
All right.
Liza, thank you very much for joining us today. Again, Liza is here from Gatehouse Admissions. And Jeremy, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It is awesome being back with you guys every time. So thank you for having me.
Of course.
If you want to be one of our success stories, sign up for a free consultation with a member of our full-time MBA admissions team. Since we've worked with tens of thousands of applicants over the past 2 decades, we can give you our honest opinion on your chances and help you put together your very best application. That is not a sales call, but rather your first session with one of us for free. We can give you a profile evaluation, answer specific questions about the process, review your resume, talk about your school choices, and so much more. Sign up at mbaMission.com/consult. We look forward to working with you.